Welcome to another Free Tool Friday. Today we're going to talk about a downtime calculator and the value that it has to your business. Let's get started. Before we dive right into the calculator and do the demo, there's a couple of things that I want you guys to understand. Number one is an RPO and the second is an RTO. And what does that mean? What do those things really relate to? Well, they actually relate to how often things are backed up and how much tolerance your business would have for losing data or even being down away from the data. So we'll talk about that in terms of just the overall definition here. So recovery point objective, it's the measure of how frequently you take backups. So if you take backups once every 24 hours, this is very typical. That's your recovery point objective, saying that you will be able to recover data in a 24-hour interval. So right here it says if a disaster occurs between backups, can you afford to lose 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, or a full day? That basically represents how fresh the data will be. So how much data do you need to recreate, or will you need to recreate if you ever had some sort of incident that separated you from your data and it couldn't be recovered very quickly? The interval in which you actually back that up would determine that. So again, if you backed it up once every 5 minutes, you would only ever lose 5 minutes worth of data. If you only back up one time per day, then you are stuck with a 24-hour RPO. So next, let's talk about recovery time objective. It's basically how much time can you be separated from your data, right? So in most cases, we would say 24 to 48 hours. Longer than that, it's going to start to hurt, especially in some larger high volume organizations. So the shorter the RTO, the most important piece here, the shorter the RTO, the less downtime the organization can endure or must endure. So how fast do we need to be able to recover the data once we see a system is down? I say data, it could be a whole system. So how fast do we need to have that data back up and running, or that system back up and running, and get it available and start working? So that's very important on the next demo that I'm going to show you here. So let's go to the demo. It's datto.com/RTO. So once you type in datto.com/RTO, you'll land here at the recovery time and downtime cost calculator. If we scroll down just a little bit, this first section, we will start to answer some questions here. I want to set this up in a typical fashion, basically how we find clients in their normal environments most of the time. So how long can your business survive without access to your IT systems? That's your RTO, your time objective, right? So most of the time we can say 48 hours. How many hours are you willing to lose or repeat? Well, again, that's kind of determined by your backup frequency, right? So if you take backups every 5 minutes, you only lose 5 minutes of work ever. And if you only back it up 24 hours, once every 24 hours, then that's how many hours of work that you could have to potentially repeat if you could not recover the data for some reason, right, in between backups. So I'm going to set that to 24 hours. This is typical of how we see most clients when we come to them and first consult with them. How much data do you have on a critical business system? This is representative of about 2 terabytes. That's fairly average across the board as far as, small to large clients. A couple of terabytes. If you're a larger client, then you're going to have multiple petabytes potentially to back up. But typically, small businesses under 500 people or so, you'll start to see about 2 terabytes is where their threshold is. How often do we back up this data? Again, we see that around 24 hours. On average, how long does it take to, notify your IT company and have them start to work on the issues? Typical turnaround times before we are engaged is an hour to an hour and a half. We're going to do the easy math today and say 1 hour and 0 minutes. A lot of the times when we engage a client, we see that they're only backing up locally or they're only backing up to the cloud. If you back up locally, that's typically something that you would see done with a USB drive or a secondary device. You copy the backup from one device to the other. You might even have a separate location. You sync that data across. Normally, local applications will do until they don't because they're not tested very well to see if they're recoverable. So that's why we say, can we recover the data? You'll hear us talk about that a lot. All right, we'll just scroll down to the next section, downtime and recovery costs. So how many employees do you have? We're going to start with a typical $1 million example. We're going to let the data, kind of be easy to calculate. So I'm going to say 1 million. I'm going to start from the bottom up. What's the average annual overhead cost of an employee? If you're about $1 million, you probably have around 7 employees. Average salary, let's say, could be around $60,000 a year. The average annual overhead cost of an employee is usually somewhere around 30 to 36%. So about 36% would be, I believe, I'm going to do some quick math here, 21,200. I could be off there just a little bit, but that's going to be close. So if we got the information filled in right here, we can actually scroll down just a little bit and see the results. Now the results are going to be in the left column. Time between backups, we talked about that being 24 hours typically. That's what we see. Recovery processing time. This is an average estimate of how long does it take to get the data back on a local system, and how much does it cost you based on the fact that you make $1 million a year, you have 7 employees, your overhead. That's everything kind of tallied in. 1 hour response time to get started on the backup, and the total estimated downtime for a downtime and loss for the single incident could be up to $5,100. $5,200, right? And then we talk about, what we can do for you over to the right. This is something that we can get into a little bit later, but it's called a Cirrus solution. And we can back up your data as close to every 5 minutes. And the average processing time to recover is about 6 minutes. We've actually seen this to be around 30 seconds. So if we get in and something's wrong, we can go to the appliance, click the button. It's dependent on the boot time of the actual machine that we're recovering. So we can recover a whole machine, we can recover small pieces of data, folders, files, you name it. We can make that happen. And you can see that the average cost to run through that scenario, even if we took an hour to respond and get to the data, that's still about a $762 cost, basically a $4,400 savings. And you can read some of the fine print down here. If for some reason, the most important thing to look at here is for some reason, say that your data cannot be recovered on the first attempt. That's very typical. What we see is the data is always backed up. If they've got a backup solution, it's backed up, somebody's monitoring, somebody's looking at it. But for some reason, there's not a lot of testing going on with that. So data is only as good as your last recovery point. So if you can't recover your data, the backup is no good. This talks about if the recovery process fails, you could be looking at an additional $16,608 per recovery attempt. So that's significant for a lot of businesses, especially if you make $1 million a year and you're running on 10 to 12% net profit. That 16.6 right there is a big dent, or could be a big dent, right? That's somebody's bonus. That's an investment in marketing that goes down the drain. This could be significant for a lot of folks. So that's the long and the short of it. If you want to take a minute and go back through and put in your numbers, I would start with the recovering the data storage. Talk about how long that you could be without your data. How many hours of work are you willing to repeat? If this number and this number are different, you need to look at that. Because if you don't back up your data but 1 time a day, then what you're saying is you're willing to lose 24 hours worth of data and recreate that. Again, this number depends on how good your IT company is, or if you have an in-house IT person, how fast that they respond, or if you have a pseudo IT person, like we see in some cases, you've got an accountant or somebody who's pulling double duty as an IT person, then that number would vary. So put in what you think is the best method there. Again, if you're backing up locally only to USB drives, this would be the selection. If you're actually backing up to cloud, you can flip this over here. Then you have a different input. What's the download speed from your cloud backup location? So that is the top end speed that you're paying your internet service provider for. So if you have a circuit that's 100 megabits download speed, you would put that in here. The faster the speed, the better, obviously in this particular scenario. So that might change your number just a little bit, but just calling that out to say if you choose cloud, then you're going to have to put in your megabits per second as far as your internet service provider provides to you. And then, of course, go down and review your results here. It could vary based on the time that it takes to download. So that's it. If you guys have any questions, please let us know in the comments. Also, I'm going to leave a link to say that if you need help with your backup solutions, if you would like to run through a free strategy call, we've got that available. I'd love to talk to you about what your RTOs and RPOs are today, what your business can stand and what it can't stand, and also maybe what the serious solution looks like for you guys. But anyway, free 1 hour strategy session. Even if you don't use our solution in the end, you do have a strategy that you could walk away with and actually execute on and make sure that your data is actually protected even more so than what it might be today. All right, folks. Well, that's another Free Tool Friday. Wrapping up. Hope everybody has a great week.